does work or what has a promise to work, or at least what doesn't work perhaps becomes a little clearer. I think when we are looking at the rethinking livelihoods education, I changed that to education rather than just teaching, because we have a different philosophy of teaching, learning we have to bring in. So thinking and education that contributes to relieving hardship and releasing potential, but without just trying to remake individuals and communities in somebody else's image. Think about as growth and satisfaction or attainment or achievement, and then good and gain. And I think unfortunately even this traditional picture nowadays, even though it is still available at many places, you will see only sometimes Sukh Labh. The Vruddhi Siddhi are not there anymore. And what is it that is actually happening? I think the bigger marginalization process, social, political, economic and other things, there are various kinds of marginalization. It happens in almost all dimensions. Is actually leading to a situation wherein the poor are produced as an output of the collective efforts of the society. And then unless we address those things which are generating this poverty systemically, we are not going to solve the poverty problem. And I think those of you who are familiar with Aniruddha Krishna's work on dynamics of poverty will realize of all these efforts that we have made some small difference of some people coming out of this poverty and some other fellows are falling into the same, and then the net result is whatever is the difference, little difference we could make. But the question is, why are they falling into it? And if you look at those reasons, and then if you understand those conditions and address those conditions, perhaps we will have a faster way of really addressing this challenge. And I think the biggest, especially in the cooperative literature and the entire cooperative movement, and which focuses on the economic side of it as the underpinning of everything else in the society, inadequate returns to the poor. The poor are working, the poor are producing, the poor are contributing to the GDP, but what is it that they get in return? So unless we address those issues, how do we change the terms of exchange in favor of them and then pull them out of it? There is no other way. I think no charity is going to work, no other pumping of credit is going to work, no other thing is going to work. You have to address the terms of exchange issue. And the terms of exchange are so unfavorable, I think you put a billionaire there, he is going to lose only. That is what the poor are losing every day. And they continue to lose. So the question is not so much as Marx has premised on the ownership of the means of the production. It is actually the terms of the exchange. I think if you look at the unequal terms of exchange, the fundamental assumption of the market is falsified every day in their life. I am giving you something, you think you are giving me of equal value? No. Because you are in a better position, you bargain and then pay me less. And then where is it getting accumulated? So the unequal exchange is the root cause of this kind of thing. How do we address those systemic issues which we have to look at? Are livelihoods sustainable? I think these questions are again from Aniruddha Krishna kind of a thing. You say BPL, some fellow says 20 rupees, some fellow says 30 rupees. How does it matter if 1 rupee more, 1 rupee less? What is it going to happen to them? Are they going to fall? And if they are so fragile and just above, and then you don't consider them as any more poor, and then we have a serious issue of definitional problems. How do we want to, I think, maybe fool ourselves and build a fool's paradise that we have solved the problem and reduces the poverty and the kinds of things, maybe for other gains. What does the sustainable livelihoods promotion actually is concerned about? To me, 3 things have come, my understanding over the years. How do we enable the factors of growth, which I have mentioned some, know-how, technology, fair and transparent remunerative markets. I consider it as the single most thing that we need to address in line with whatever Dr. Kuyen and from him we have understood. The favorable terms of exchange, nurturing the enhancement sense of self-worth. I think most of the poverty alleviation programs or reduction programs or elimination programs do not really build it in such a manner that their sense of self-worth has increased. That is a bigger problem. And most exogenous development programs or interventions which are made by others are unlikely to yield results, give kind of a thing because of these gaps. Design reality gaps are there. We are saying that perspective is different, our perspective is different. You go there, something it's not unlikely to work with it. Poor implementation strategies we have seen. Problems in managing the scale we know. Inequitable access to marginalized groups. Even though you say poorest of the poor program, but it's still hijacked by somebody who is not poorest of the poor. Lack of desired participatory governance systems and other things. But how do you trigger an endogenous development intervention? I think that is what is the question Mr. Girish Sohani has pointed it out. How do we make the very poor or very marginalized engage in finding a solution for themselves? As long as they are not engaged, you cannot really find a solution for them. They have to find a solution. Maybe you can help a little bit. Don't really put yourself too much that you can solve the problem of this thing. Then it involves local mobilization of resources, supplementing in enabling ways rather than supplanting and promoting dependency. And this is what we are trying to do at a larger level. Then I think these issues I will leave it out, food security, etc. But the empowering process. I think we have tools to the empowering process. And I think it is so nice that even though I am a poor, I can still laugh, I can still be happy, perhaps more happy and then more satisfied than many other people who have other things. It's not so much dependent on what you have, what you are, and what you believe on that. So this is a perspective which builds on that. Can we pull people from assumptions about themselves and assumptions about others to a situation wherein they feel they can do it? This is actually the transformation process which I think Paulo Freire and others have articulated. Sense of being objects or victims of the circumstances, conditions, forces in the world. Can you turn yourself to a subject? Start thinking like a subject. Is there anything you can do to change them? And if that has to be brought, then you have to build this sense of self-worth and build this sense of self-confidence in the form of I can, things for themselves. I think many have articulated the solutions have to come from them. The solutions they have to work. You cannot work for them. If you are lucky and if you are blessed, you can work with them. And otherwise, working for them and trying to put yourself into a high pedestal of that you can solve their problem, I think is a bigger issue which we need to tackle from our end. Our perspective needs to change there. With the problems of the rest of the society as well. Can we leave the poor as they are and their condition becomes worse and then we continue to fool ourselves that we are progressing? I think it's not possible. It's better. I think from the point of view of the curriculum, what is it the workplace demands? I think we have heard Mr. Swami, what is he is looking for. Can we prepare a student or a career professional who can collaborate, not only just compete? But if you look at then the ways in which we train, in the way that we really project, this fellow got so much of salary more and so much other fellow got less, and then that is the parameter on which the value of the student is determined, then you are not preparing them for collaboration. You are preparing them for something else. The teamwork and the leadership issues. I think this appreciation and integration of differences, diversities and mixed abilities. I think this is the big challenge. Because I think the problem of development or poverty is what we call is a divergent problem. It's not a convergent problem. That's why you don't have unique solutions. That's why all replication efforts all over the world have failed. They will continue to fail. Because the problem is going to be endemic to the situation and then you have to evolve a solution from there. So the entire approach needs to be different. And then what is that different approach will take us to a different kind of an education, which David Cotton articulated a long time ago, somewhere in the 80s, in the form of people-centered development. You can see what it involves is learning to be effective. You don't have a ready solution. I think Murli has brought it out so nicely. None of us have a solution. Perhaps the poor themselves also don't have a solution. But that needs exploration. And exploration requires an open mind. And then exploration requires unbiased views. You don't have a solution you are selling there, but you are trying to find out a solution. Because you can't do it, and no one single can do it. It has to be a joint exploration. That has to happen. You need some kind of orientation here, and then how are you going to bring it into it? I think the cognitive domain also, looking at many courses that I have come across, they deal with only knowledge of specifics, little bit of terminology, jargon they learn, including in other technical programs also, even management and technical programs. They know only the jargons, they don't know beyond that. Ways and means of dealing with specifics, a little bit understanding is there. Universals and abstractions, principles and generalizations, some theories are taught to them, but they will perhaps know that. When it comes to the application, then I think there is very little. Sorry, I think I have missed something here. I have moved too much forward, moving backward, what I do. We learn this much. I am teaching this course, but only few fellows will learn. What do? I just leave it. The dialogical method, which is what is required. And we need a dialogue. We don't need a lecture. If you're calling them lecture sessions, how many sessions you have, how many lectures you have for defining a course, credit, requirements, all that needs to be redefined. And if you have to go in this way, then this is a joint exploration for the teacher and the taught. No one is put on the high pedestal. You are doing the joint thing. And what does that joint thing involve? Joint action and joint reflection. And you have to see these sessions as action reflection sessions, in which you are distilling everything out of your own experience as well and the experience of the others, which is supposed to lead to, contrary to what David Cole talked about a learning cycle, what you can see it as going into some kind of a spiral there. Then you move on, and then you move on the spiral. Maybe there are others whom you can help as you know. But this dialogical method is singly missing in many of the colleges and pedagogy tools. Because it's based on lectures, it's based on notes provided, or it's based on guides provided, but there is no discussion. There is no dialogue. And the case method, which is so supposedly conducive for this dialogue, is so less used and increasingly getting less used in those institutions which really watch for that. That is the kind of a problem that which we have. And we have to bring back these dialogical processes, because all great learning all over the world, in all cultures, is through dialogue. And all great scriptures are dialogues. They are not monologues delivered by one lecture to some hundreds of students sitting before them. We have a methodology which we can use. I am just mentioning it, we don't have time to go through in detail. The criterion referenced instruction methodology, which is called the CRI methodology. It has basically 5 teaching learning principles. It begins with the perceived purpose. So we have to be very clear about the purpose. And often the purpose has to be stated in what we call behavioral objectives. And many of our teaching courses outlines, if you see, you will say, the student will learn this, student will learn this, etc. We will write there as an objective at the end of the course. But what we are saying is, you have to write the objectives of the course in such a manner. What are the behavioral objectives that this fellow is able to come up with at the end of this course? That will certainly enrich whatever it is that they are going to do. So if we can't do it, I think that much we will be missing. We will be losing on the effectiveness, the first learning. And then we have to have this reflective practices built into individuals, organizations, so that they can have this. Retreat is not treating actually. In the retreat, nobody is reflecting. They are only treating their senses more. They are having more drinks, more free time, more good food, more loafing around and coming back. That is not retreat. That's something. You can do it, that also. Maybe that is also required. The real retreat requires you to stand away and stay back from what you are doing, and then critically reflect what is it that you are doing, why you are doing, how you are doing, is there any improvement that is required, and then you figure it out. Then that reflective dialoguing, in how many institutions it is happening, I am afraid. Partly the problem is, we have separated planning, implementation and evaluation into different tasks. So there is no learning taking place. The planner is planning, implementer is implementing, that fellow doesn't know what is happening here. Now we are very popular about third-party evaluations. Those fellows will come and then they will give something. Nobody is learning anything from this exercise. We have to understand, can we really break these planning, implementation and evaluation tasks They are part of a learning cycle. So how do we put it in every role and every individual's role, every level that which we are working, then only it will improve. Otherwise we will go on doing hundreds of years, but nothing, that experience is not resulting in anything. I think ultimately livelihoods education is about cultivating a heart. A heart, I think Dr. Kurian used to say, left of center, to better and create institutional structures and mechanisms to improve and secure better standards of living for all, including those marginalized. And the three critical ingredients to my understanding are, you have to have a orientation, a sustainable development orientation. I think we need to add this word, even though it may look like, why are we adding this word? But at least adding this word is going to differentiate from what we have done in the name of development so far. These things. One, we call it as an integral learning. The integral learning encompasses conceptual knowledge, some experiential knowledge, factual and procedural knowledge, and propositional knowledge. I think poor people have a lot of wisdom. There is a lot of tacit knowledge there sitting. But are we giving any value to it? Are we trying to build on it? Are we trying to integrate it? Are we even making an effort to know about it? I think one of the Ajit's anguish is that we are so much isolated. The academic world is so much isolated from the rest of the reality, and we are very happy in our own cocoon world, and we don't want to interact and integrate. Then professionalization, in the name of it, lot of things are happening rather than the real things that has to happen. I had put some kind of a thing here. Of course, apart from these skills and high quality work output, etc., professional ethics. We have to question how far our doctors, lawyers, and similarly development workers and development professionals, and what kind of ethics and what kind of values, reasonable work habits, motivation to work independently. Why do we need to have so many supervisory these things? And the transdisciplinarity and the conscientization as modes. These are the processes through which we can really deliver. But for doing this, I think we need a much, much stronger and harder look at what is it that we are doing in the name of education and in the name of livelihoods education. Unless that changes substantially, I think we have a bigger problem than what we are assuming we can fix it with changing this a little bit here and a little bit here. Thank you so much for your patience.